we're starting with letter 67, which is on page 179. Welcome back. We're going to have 4 weeks of classes, and then we'll be on summer break. So this letter, the extraordinary opportunity knocking on your door. Greeting and blessing. I received your letter of the 29th of Adar, and may God grant that you have good news to report on the matters about which you write in your letter. As we are approaching the season of our freedom, I trust that you will take time out to reflect on the significance of this great festival. So this was written on the Rebbe's birthday, actually, in the year 1960, which is just 4 days before Pesach. So it's the season of freedom. So I trust you will take out time to reflect on the significance of this great festival, recalling the enslavement in Egypt, which was not only a physical enslavement, but also a spiritual one. And by the way, being that we're instructed, I'm adding now, being that we're instructed, as we say in the Haggadah, that in every generation we must see ourselves as going out of Egypt, and the Alter Rebbe adds in Tanya, and every single day we should see ourselves as going out of Egypt, meaning that there is a spiritual exodus from our limitations, which we have to work on constantly. So this letter is relevant. Don't think it's not relevant because it's not the Pesach season. It's very relevant. Yet because of the great faith of the children of Israel in God, they were liberated from bondage and received the Torah, thus giving them true and complete freedom. The simple message of it is that no Jew should ever give up hope and should always strive to free himself from the influences and limitations of the environment, as well as from the internal temptations, and make steady strides along the path of Torah and mitzvahs. So what the Rebbe is saying is a few things here. The Rebbe is saying, number one, that we need to be aware of the fact that our environment puts influences and limitations on us. And being a free person means that we are aware of that and we free ourselves of those influences and of those limitations. Secondly, and this, the Rebbe is making another point, and this point is going back to his introduction, and that is recalling the enslavement from Egypt, which was not only physical but spiritual. And because of our great faith, we were liberated from bondage and received the Torah, thus giving them true and complete freedom. The Rebbe is emphasizing that the true and complete freedom is not going out of Egypt. True and complete freedom is when God gave us the Torah. When we received the Torah, that's when we had true and complete freedom. And this is an entire subject in and of its own, and that is that there's freedom from and there's freedom to. Freedom from is a more of a passive freedom, and that is, let's say someone is in prison. They're physically in prison, and they're given freedom. They're taken out of prison. Are they now free people? Externally they are, but internally they're not necessarily. That's the point the Rebbe is making. The receiving of the Torah parts, when the Jews left Egypt, we were externally free. We were not necessarily internally free. Once we received the Torah, which means we dedicated our lives to a purpose, which means that we chose with our own free choice to live a certain way, then we are being free to something. Not just free from something, but free to something. And that is real freedom. That's why a lot of people can be very wealthy people, and yet they are still very enslaved. They may have freedom from certain types of constraints. They may be healthy, and they may be wealthy. So they have, their health is good. They're not constrained. Their wealth, so they can do many, many things, and they are still not free people. Why? Because they live under the influences and limitations of the environment. Now, think about that for a minute. If we look at our lives, right, and we look at the way we're living and what we do maybe to show that we are free, and often much of that is what society calls freedom and calls luxury and calls whatever, comfort or whatever it may be. And yet there is all of this internal frustration that we suffer from, and indicating very clearly that we're still enslaved in some way. We're still constrained, right? So so both of these are very important. So there's influence and limitations of the environment, and then of course we have our internal temptations, which we all have, and that is its own struggle. That is regardless of what's going on outside of a person. A person always has this. And the way to free ourselves is when we commit ourselves to a value that is objective, not subjective to the world, but is something which is independent of the world. And that is what God gave us at Mount Sinai, and that is the path of Torah and mitzvahs, the path of the Jew. So as for personal problems, so this person obviously wrote to the Rebbe that he has some personal problems. The best advice is that you should try to think as little as possible of your inner problems. We've had this in some previous letters. This is a very powerful advice, which is a little bit counterintuitive. And that is, stop thinking about your problems. It's almost, if I may say, and again, a person has to be in the proper place to do this, right? But it's almost the Rebbe telling a person, stop going to your therapist and talking about your problems. Now, and the reason why I'm saying it's almost the Rebbe saying this, because I'm not saying that absolutely. There's a time and a place for a person to go to their therapist and talk about the problems. There is, however, a very big handicap, or what's the right word I'm looking for? There's a very big weakness that also comes out of talking about my problems to my therapist or to whoever, or to my spouse or to my friends all the time or whatever it is, and that is that I'm living in my problems. So ultimately, if I do that for too long, I just make my problems bigger. Okay, we have to talk. Sometimes we just have to express our problems so we can speak it out with someone, etc. But if we begin to just, I'm going to call it obsess, by just repeatedly living in our problems, then we create the problem, we solidify the problem. So the Rebbe gives us advice a lot. Okay? Now, I'm saying a person has to be ready for this. Sometimes people are just not ready for it. They need to be, they need sympathy, they need to be understood, etc. But hopefully we get past that and stop thinking about your problems until you completely dismiss them from your mind. Because if you stop thinking about your problems, guess what happens? If you don't think about your problems, in many respects, you've gotten rid of your problems. I'm not saying that, of course, there are problems that are objectively outside of us that we have to deal with. But the emotional aspect, the suffering aspect of our problems is all our thinking about them. Everything else are the technical aspects of our problems that we have to deal with and figure out what to do. And sometimes they last longer, sometimes they last shorter. But the level of suffering that we have from them will depend on how much we let our minds, which then in effect it affects our hearts, lives in them. This means not even thinking about their harmful aspects or how to overcome them. So you understand how far the Rebbe is going? The Rebbe is going, just forget about them. But completely disengaging your thoughts from those problems and engaging them in matters of Torah and mitzvahs. Use your mind to be engaged in Torah and mitzvahs. Another good method is to try to be among people as much as possible. Another very big piece of advice the Rebbe gives, which is very practical. It's not as I'll say as psychological as the first one, but although it is psychological, and that is be around people. People need connection with people. Even introverts, being around people gets you out of yourself. That's the reason why it's important to be around people. And I see this very clearly with myself. I wonder if you do, but I know that sometimes I'm not in the greatest mood, but I have to come now to minyan. We have a service, we have a minyan, and I'm the rabbi. So I come to the minyan, and just by virtue of the fact that I walk in, I say hello to a few people. Someone asks me a question, we have a conversation, we just talk about how terribly the Phillies are doing. I don't know, whatever is going on, all of that, and I walk out and I'm in a better place. just like that. So the statement which a boy of the yeshiva has made, as you write, is not true. So I don't know what this is. It'd be interesting to know, but the person says, I don't know if this person may have been a yeshiva student. That's the impression from this comment over here. That the statement which the boy made, you should know, is not true. So I guess the Rebbe felt that he had to address some matter that this boy was maybe obsessing over, maybe that someone says something to him and he felt terrible about it. And the Rebbe is saying it's not true. May the forthcoming season of our freedom bring you true freedom from all the distracting thoughts and from all temptations and diversion, both external and internal, so that you can serve God with the fullness and gladness of your heart. Wishing you a kosher and happy, inspiring Pesach with blessing by Nissen Mindel. Nissen Mindel is one of the Rebbe's secretaries who would write most of the Rebbe's English letters, and my son-in-law, his great-grandson, is named after him. Okay. We're good, everyone? Any questions, objections? Okay. We're up to letter 68, feeling like an outcast. This one's from the year 1967. Blessing, Australia. Blessing and greeting. Your cable reached me with some delay, for those who remember what cables are, which I don't really. But I also received your recent correspondence. She must have written the letter too. Is this a woman? For some reason, I think it's a woman. Mrs. Yeah. Upon receipt of your cable, the following reply was cabled back to you, replying to your cable, wishing you successful treatment, good news with blessings. So the Rebbe sent back a cable. Now he's sending this letter. May God grant that you should have good news to report, especially as we are in the auspicious month of Adar. That's the month before Pesach, the month of Purim, which is also a happy month, a month that carries the energy of joy. The auspiciousness of this month, of course, connected with the miraculous Purim festival, in which Jewish women have a particularly important part. For Esther, together with Mordechai, brought about the turn of the events. And although Mordechai was as much the essential figure as Esther, and as we say in the Purim prayer, in the days of Mordechai and Esther, so we make reference to Mordechai as well as Esther, yet the Megillah containing the story of Purim, which is one of the sacred books of Tanakh, is not called after Mordechai. What's it called? Megillas Esther. Nor after Mordechai and Esther jointly, but solely after Esther, Megillas Esther, the book of Esther. So Rebbe's trying to emphasize that even though the miracle that happened on Purim relates to both Mordechai and Esther, we do see that there is a unique focus on Esther in certain ways, such as the name of the Megillah. With reference to your letter, I read with considerable interest your outline of your curriculum vitae, I think it's called. I'm gratified to note that you are conducting your home in the way of our sacred Torah, called Toras Chaim, which means the Torah of life, because it is both the source of true life as well as the true guide in the daily life. Despite the difficulties which you had in the past and are still experiencing to some extent. To be sure, that period of time in the past when the daily life should have been different requires rectification, especially by means of a determined effort to improve the present and future. So I think the Rebbe is referring to how she must have written about the way she used to live, and that it was not, the proper way for a Jew to live. So the Rebbe is saying that regarding that, how do you rectify? It has to be rectified. How do you rectify it? By the means of a determined effort to improve the present and future. You fix the past by the way the present is and the way the future is going to be. And that makes up for the past. On the other hand, human nature is such that things that come easily are taken for granted. The Rebbe says a rule, a human psychological rule. Things that come easy are taken for granted, which is the reason why statistics do show that most people, and I think it's a large majority of people who win the lottery, squander that money very quickly, and that's simply because they have not worked for it, so therefore it came easy and is taken for granted, and are not so appreciated and cherished as things for which one had to fight and struggle. So, by the way, this is a very powerful point right here, a life point here, and that is that struggle in life in order to attain something is very important. Even though we don't like it. I don't like it either, but it's still very important. Because when we struggle, then we hold on to what it is that we are creating. When we don't struggle, it often slips through our fingers. And the Rebbe elaborates. Thus, the level of Yiddishkeit which you and your husband have attained through real efforts has permeated you more deeply and thoroughly. Why is the Rebbe saying it permeated them? Because when you struggle for something, it permeates you. That's the idea. It becomes one with you. It doesn't slip through your fingers. It's not shallow. And may God grant that you should both continue in this direction together with your children, without allowing yourself to be hindered or influenced in any way by the difficulties which you describe in your letter. Don't let the difficulties hinder you. The difficulties are only making sure that it sticks with you, that it's one with you. On the contrary, the difficulties themselves can serve as a challenge and stimulus to greater spiritual advancement, as is also explained in Hasidic literature, namely that one could learn a lesson even from the Yetzer Hara. For it is clear how persistent and relentless the Yetzer Hara is in doing its duty to distract a Jew from the way of the Torah and mitzvahs. By presenting him constantly with various difficulties, temptations, and all sorts of arguments to the contrary. So much so that the Yetzer Hara often appears in the guise of piety and the voice of morality, such as that the commandment of honoring one's father and mother, the need to preserve peace and harmony, and the like justify a deviation from the way of Shulchan Aruch. What does the evil inclination do very well? It becomes pious. How could the evil inclination be pious? Because it uses our values against us. It says you're supposed to honor your father and mother. If you're not going to eat, I'm making this up. I don't know what this letter's issue, what this woman's challenges were, but if you're not going to eat in your parents' home because it's not kosher, that's not honoring your parents, right? Now we have a conflict, right? But in fact, we know that the Torah says that you honor your parents, your mother and father, as long as it's not in conflict with what God commands us to do, right? So we need to know the value system that the Torah gives us. Likewise, the other example he gave is or preserving peace and harmony. Peace and harmony is one of the highest values in the Torah. However, it doesn't mean you do anything for peace and harmony. You don't compromise any value for peace and harmony, right? On the contrary, within your values, you maintain peace and harmony. In fact, often, if you have to compromise your values because of peace and harmony, you're not going to be creating peace and harmony. Because peace really comes from the heart. It doesn't come from what we do. So people will say, because you do this and that, we don't have any peace in the home. That generally speaking is not true. Generally speaking, it's because one person is unwilling to accept what's important to another person that there's no peace in the home. Peace is, I'm at peace with you and who you are and what you like, right? And anyone who's married knows that there are going to be a number of things, maybe some people will say plenty of things that my spouse likes that I don't like or that maybe even irked me. But then I grow up, I develop myself, and I mature, and I say, if my beloved loves this, then I accept that. That's beautiful. I don't have to love it necessarily, but I can give them the space to love that. That's how peace is created. So the evil inclination gets very smart, and that's apparently, from what she wrote to the Rebbe, that's what her evil inclination was doing. The determination and dedication of the Yetzer Hara to its duty, the dedication that the evil inclination has to its job, which is to entice us, should therefore serve as an inspiration. How much to us that we should have the same dedication to what we were put on this world to do. How much more should a person be devoted and dedicated to his real task? Considering that the Jew has a divine soul and a natural inner drive towards the good and the holy, which would make one truly thrilled to be able to serve God with joy and gladness of heart. In other words, the Rebbe is saying, on the contrary, you should learn from your evil inclination's dedication to be just as dedicated. In connection with the above, I must take exception to the expression which you use in your letter, that you sometimes feel like outcasts within your family whose ways have parted from the Jewish way of life, and who resent your adherence to traditional Yiddishkeit. you understand the challenge that they're dealing with, which is a major challenge, and not so uncommon for people who begin to observe Torah and mitzvahs. They feel like outcasts in their family. Their entire family, let's say, what we're going to say, I'm making this up because I don't know, but I'm assuming the entire family is secular. They laugh at what they're doing. They say that they're ruining the family because, by events, you can't eat our food and this and that. And all, these are all very common things that happen, right? And she wrote that to the Rebbe that she feels like outcasts. So the Rebbe writes, I take exception to this expression. I don't like this expression. As a matter of fact, the situation is precisely the reverse. For if anyone is to be considered an outcast, it is the one that excludes himself from the way of Torah and the Jewish tradition, which goes back more than 100 generations to the time when the Jewish people became a holy nation at Mount Sinai. The Rebbe says this many times, and it's true, of course, and we need to see the truth. Who is the outcast? The outcast isn't the one who's doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's like in our world, by the way, this is what's going on in our society today, right? That, everyone's lining up to support, God forbid, to support the evil in the Middle East. Hamas, Hezbollah, whatever it is, right? That's the predominant voice in the street supporting them, right? So am I an outcast because I don't support them, because I say evil is evil? No, I'm not the outcast. They are the outcast. The fact that they're the majority doesn't make them not the outcast. So when a person is doing the right thing, they should never feel like they are the outcast. That's what the Rebbe is saying to them. In other words, the Rebbe is saying that of course the Rebbe understands that socially they are the outcast in their family, right? But the Rebbe is saying you have to have a deeper perspective. So when you come together with your family, you need to realize that you represent something, right? And that spiritually, you are not the outcast, right? Now, of course, you don't give your family a speech about this, right? But you come with much more confidence about who you are. Jewish history has clearly demonstrated what has been the mainstream of Jewish tradition and the very basis of Jewish existence throughout the ages. We have always had deviationists. From the time of the golden calf worshippers to present day assimilationists, right? So the Rebbe says we've always had people deviating. From the very start, we had people build the golden calf, right? More commonly, we have movements today who deviate from the truth that the Torah is from Mount Sinai and cannot be changed. We have always had deviationists, and from the time of the golden calf to the present assimilationists. But all these have been passing phenomena, which come to a more or less swift end when some of the deviationists return to the mainstream of Jewish tradition, while others, the outcasts, were lost. The Rebbe speaks about this a lot. The Rebbe says, one of two things happens to people who deviate from the Torah. See, the Torah is true. Truth is eternal. Something that is eternal lasts forever. If you look at the common denominator of the Jewish people throughout all of history, because we want to understand how is it the Jews of all people, who are the most oppressed, persecuted people, yet are always around, cannot be destroyed. We are an eternal people because we are anchored in and a part of eternity. But if someone deviates from that, which unfortunately has happened throughout our history, where groups have deviated from the true Torah, what happens with time is one of two things. Either they come back or they get lost. Always see it. You could see it. I don't want to elaborate explicitly, and it's tragic, but you can see it right now if you observe what's going on in the Jewish world over the last 75 years. You see it right in front of your eyes. And this, by the way, is what's behind what everyone wonders about. Some people don't wonder. I hope you don't, because I hope you understand. And this explains it. Why Chabad is the most effective movement in the Jewish world today. And that is because it is true, like all of Orthodoxy, it is true to Torah from Sinai. It's true to God, right? And its emotional approach is also true to the Torah. And what's happening elsewhere is people are just slowly but surely, tragically getting lost, or coming to Chabad, or to any other Orthodoxy, whatever it may be. The same was true in regard to the Baal worshippers during the period of the first Beis Hamikdash in Jewish history. We've had during the temple times, which was an amazing time, an unbelievable time. We had people worshiping idols. The Sadducees during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbe breaks this all down. We had the Sadducees. They only believed in the written law. They didn't believe in the oral law, which is heresy, right? What happened? You know any Sadducees today? There are no Sadducees today, right? Followed by the first Christians. Later, the Karaites. These are all, first Christians were Jews. That's what the Rebbe is referring to. And then you have the Karaites, also only believed in the written law. The common denominator that bound all Jews together and served as the basis of the Jewish survival cannot be considered in terms of territory. For Jews have been without their country for the greater part of their history. Nor can it be considered the language, because Jews spoke different languages at different times and countries. And even during the time of King Chizkiah, one of the great Jewish kings in Jerusalem, there were Jews who spoke Aramaic and not Hebrew. Nor can other cultural or social factors be considered as the common denominator of Jewish survival, since these too have changed from time to time and from country to country. The only things which have not changed in Jewish life are Shabbos observance, kashrus, kosher, tefillin, and all the other mitzvahs of the Torah, both the written Torah and the oral Torah. It is therefore the Torah and mitzvahs which is the basis of Jewish life and survival. Consequently, the more one's daily life and conduct adheres to this pattern of Jewish living, the more one is attached to the Jewish people. And conversely, the more concessions one is willing to make, the more one lessens one's bonds with the Jewish people until one may become an outcast, God forbid. The Rebbe spells this out as clearly as I think it can be spelled out. And it's very, very important for all of us to hear this, So we're clear, so we make sure that our lives are moving more and more in alignment with Torah and mitzvahs. Not less, God forbid, where we find ourselves making less and less concessions. Right? Because that's ultimately what these other movements have always done, is they made major concessions, fundamental ones actually, and then slowly disappear, God forbid. In our lives, hopefully we don't make any fundamental concessions, but practical concessions sometimes we make, we all do, right? And we want to make sure we're making less and less and less of those, and we're getting more and more aligned with Torah and mitzvahs. That is what is eternal. So the Rebbe is really bolstering and emboldening this woman in her and her family's commitment to Torah and mitzvahs in the face of the fact that the rest of her family is not committed to this, with her understanding that she is not an outcast. She's actually in alignment with the history of the Jewish people. As for the charge that some people make to the fact that this kind of traditional Jewish life is fanaticism and the like, this is also nothing new. For there have always been Jews from the time of the golden calf worshippers mentioned above who considered themselves modern and called others fanatics, fundamentalists, and the like, right? That's exactly what they do. They call everyone fundamentalists, and that's their way of so now that's why I'm not, I don't join such people. With regard to your personal question, if the question is still valid as to the advisability of your taking a position in the educational field, I guess she may have already made that decision by the time she's receiving this letter. So the Rebbe's writing, if the question is still valid, a position which some of your local Hasidic friends who know you and know the position have urged you to accept, it is surely unnecessary to emphasize to you at length the importance of education and the privilege of being able to educate Jewish boys and girls. The Rebbe says, the value of educating boys and Jewish boys and girls is tremendous. So going to education is fantastic. It should be borne in mind that every little bit of good influence, while the children are young, is multiplied many times as a child becomes of age. The obvious illustration is that of a seed or seedling, when even a small scratch or defect at that stage could become crippling to the adult tree, while every little benefit at that stage is multiplied many times. Meaning that the more we expose our children and teach them the younger the age, the better, the more we mold them and give them a gift for life. The longer we wait, the less that will naturally stick with them. Now, of course, it can stick with them, right? But when children learn things at a very young age, that becomes a part of their being, of their molding. It's no longer like an idea to consider to them. I send you my prayerful wishes for the fulfillment of your heart's desires for good, especially for a refuah, for healing and good health, and the fulfillment of the mitzvahs with joy and gladness of heart, and hope to hear good news from you. P.S. Your previous letter was also duly received, but for certain reasons not previously acknowledged. How are we doing, everyone? Okay. Thank you for the thumbs up, Joyce. Okay, we are up to letter 8. I'm sorry, letter 69. Letter 69. Defenses built on guilt. This is from the year 1973, Erev Shavuos. So it's right before the holiday of Shavuos, which is our upcoming holiday in about 4.5 weeks. Mr. and Mrs. S, and this is the P.S. of the letter, it looks like. That's what it seems like to me. It says P.S. Or I don't know. But anyway, no, it doesn't seem like it from the way it's written. P.S. maybe where they live, or I don't know. I just received Mrs. letter in which she writes how upset she was at her parents' attitude toward your way of life, conducted in accordance with the Torah's Chaim. Her feelings are, of course, understandable. I trust, however, that the following remarks will help alleviate her anxiety about her parents' attitude towards, I guess, this man's, her husband's maybe, way of life, I'm guessing. Consider the psychology of persons in your parents' age. This is, again, so important. I've counseled young adults who have adopted the life of Torah and mitzvahs, which created a major challenge for their parents. Because it's never easy for parents when children live life differently than they do, and when it imposes on their relationship. The kids can't come on Shabbos, they don't eat in the home. Imagine how offensive it is, or it feels to parents when their own child says, "I can no longer eat in your home." It's like, well, we can't have dinner together anymore. That's a major that's a major challenge. The parents who learn with time to deal with this properly end up having a beautiful relationship with their children. And I've seen in many situations where the parents, thank God, with time, work things out. Some people will make a little kitchen in their home, which is a kosher kitchen. So when their kids come, the kids cook there, and then they can eat together. Whatever it is, there are always solutions. Right? There needs to be commitment on both sides. There needs to be respect. Number one, as I tell the children always, you must understand your parents' position that you are putting them in. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. I'm doing the right thing. That's completely irrelevant. You have to realize the position you're putting your parents in. You have to acknowledge that to them over and over, and you have to take responsibility for all of the impositions you're making on them. Like, figure out, be creative. But when they do that, a number of things I've seen have happened. Number one is they end up having a beautiful relationship and it's all good. And number two is they end up having far more grandchildren than any of their children have, than any of their peers have, and they end up being the richest people in the world. And then a few years later, like, wow, this is just amazing. Okay, so consider the psychology of persons in her parents' age who followed a certain philosophy of life all their years, and then suddenly find that they had lived in error, and that the error is of a very serious and cardinal nature, having deprived themselves of something which should permeate every minute of a Jew's life. It is clear that in such a case, it is natural to set up defenses by all sorts of arguments and rationalizations, however weak they may be, so as not to have to admit their lifelong error. Now imagine what's going on. Suddenly you have a kid, right? A child, look at this, an adult child, but and they start arguing and saying, but this is the way a Jew should live, right? And they live their life entirely differently, right? They didn't know about Judaism. They weren't given the opportunity, right? They enjoy a good Philly cheesesteak, right? They like going to the movies on Friday night specifically, and Saturday is the perfect day to mow the lawn, and that's what they do. And that's what everyone does. And that's what all the Jews they know do, right? And now, all of a sudden, they're in their 50s and their 60s, whatever it is, and suddenly their kids, their adult child comes home and is challenging everything that they're doing and expects them to change, right? Of course they're going to be the natural reaction is to be defensive. So we have to understand, obviously being defensive is not the healthy response. But however, we also know that we get defensive too, right? That's natural. On the contrary, we should find ways to make them comfortable and not defensive so that they can start examining more honestly and then do whatever they can do. In the present case, moreover, the difficulty is compounded by the fact that the impact of this sudden reorientation comes from their own children, who happily made the change. For to follow the children's example implies a reversal of roles. It says we made a big mistake, where instead of parents teaching their children, the children have to show the way to the parents, right? That's not the normal way. Add to the above also the following consideration, where a group or a people finds itself in the minority numerically, though very prominent in quality, it is nevertheless faced with a disadvantage at every step in the daily life. For the pressures of the majority and the inconveniences and the difficulties of being different present a serious and immediate challenge to the minority, while the superiority in quality is not always appreciated and cannot be utilized in a tangible way. The Rebbe says, what is he referring to? I am speaking of the Jewish people, which throughout its history, ever since it became a people at Sinai, had been a minority among the peoples of the world. Yet at the same time, the Jewish people has been a light unto the nations, having given the world the concept of true monotheism. At a time when polytheism reigned supreme and dominated the thinking and way of the world, customs and mores of all the nations of the world. It was natural and inevitable, therefore, that with the Jews' acceptance of the Torah, making them into a different, holy people, there came universal resentment and hatred towards them on the part of the nations of the world who were in the overwhelming majority. So it's not surprising that there is anti-Semitism, right? Because we're taking on a whole new different. It's literally like a child coming home and beginning to be religious. I shouldn't say literally, but it's very similar. At the same time, the Jews became a dominating factor in the world in matters of quality, even in areas not related to religion. It is a well-known fact, for example, that the percentage of Jewish Nobel Prize laureates is out of proportion to the Jewish population in the world, or even in the scientific world. Similarly, in other areas, even in Soviet Russia, with all the anti-Jewish restrictions, for more than half a century, Jews have excelled in various fields out of all proportions to the Jewish population there, as has been pointedly shown by the number of academics among the new immigrants from there. Yet the tendency towards assimilation with the majority has been strongest among the upper classes of Jews, to the extent of deluding themselves that the way of the Gentile society is superior, in order to invent some flimsy justification for imitating the Goy, the Gentile, in all his ways and bringing up the children accordingly. One can therefore understand the sense of guilt of these unhappy Jews on discovering their error and trying to cover it up. So they're making a grave error, and now someone within their own home is calling them out, and the amount of guilt one can feel for that is enormous. There is no need to further elaborate on the above to you. I hope it will suffice at least to lessen your worry and to strengthen your hope that by indirect influence upon your parents in the right direction, they will eventually find the strength and conviction to modify their views and attitudes from non-acceptance, acceptance to reconciliation, and hopefully to more than that. Beautiful letter, in my opinion. Any questions or comments? Okay. Such a polite, respectful audience. Okay, we're now up to letter number 70, a sufficient injection dosage. P.S. This is a P.S. This is from the year 1976. With regard to the problem with your son, about which you write in your letter, the seriousness of it is self-evident. Intermarriage, God forbid, is most tragic, not only from the religious point of view, but it is also very tragic from any other point of view, and for both parties, as experience has amply borne out. This is one of the points the Rebbe makes about intermarriage, which is really powerful, is this little point, and that is that it's tragic for both parties. Why is it tragic for both parties? Anyone know? It's tragic for both parties because why do we have to go a little bit backwards here? But why do we get married? What is the purpose of marriage? Now, why we get married may be different than why maybe we are meant to get married. But the purpose of marriage is for a man and a woman to come together and build something, right? Which will say build a Jewish home and also build a home which is dedicated to Torah and mitzvahs. That's the reason why we get married. And love is a part of that. But love is not the reason why we get married, right? Love needs to be a part of the marriage, but it's not the reason we get married. If I marry someone and I and she have different purposes in this world, then we cannot actually build together a focused home because we have different purposes, right? So if I really claim to love this woman, then I would never tell her to enter into a marriage where she'd be married to a person who has a different mission than her. That's essentially how the Rebbe discusses this elsewhere as well. And that's why it is really tragic for both parties. And the Rebbe says, as experience is amply borne out, and if you just from experience of watching what happens, like someone just told me yesterday, I hear these stories all the time, but someone just told me yesterday that a man married a woman who was not Jewish. I think she converted. I don't know what type of a conversion. Hopefully it was a kosher conversion, but we'll assume it was, just for the point I want to make here. And whenever they go to the mother's home, to her mother's home, the mother tells their son, I don't even want to repeat it, but Jay is what we call him, and they pronounce, but in the context of the way she says it, it says CHRIS, loves you. Now the husband becomes infuriated and tells his wife, our son is Jewish. Your mother cannot tell him that whatever loves him, right? So what ends up happening is when you have intermarriages is, right, that it creates tremendous conflict. And by the way, very often the conflict only happens because the two, they're having a good time together. At the beginning of our marriage, it's a little bit of a honeymoon, right? Everything is fantastic, and we are. I'm going to say it this way: we are pleasured by each other. Okay, that means we're indulging in the pleasure of this person, and then life starts kicking in. And one of the significant ways that happens is we have a child, and the moment a person has a child, that is when their inner being starts waking up, without even their effort, without their desire, without their effort, it starts waking up. And suddenly you have a person who's a completely secular person, and suddenly they want their child to have a Jewish upbringing. And suddenly they want their child to have a Christian upbringing if they're Christian. right? And that's often where the conflicts happen, and that's what was going on with this couple. So, and this happens very, very often. So therefore, the Rebbe says that we know this. Where are we at here? As experience is amply borne out. Therefore, it's necessary to do everything possible to prevent such a suicidal act on the part of both of them. The Rebbe calls it suicidal. Why would the Rebbe call it suicidal? Because it is suicide to the life of each one of them, both the Jew and the Gentile. You say, why? Suicide? They can still live till 120. It depends how we look at life. If life is physical existence, then that would be correct. It's not suicide. But if life is with purpose, then it's suicide. I emphasize both of them, since just as it is a disaster for one, so it is also the other party. It is for the other party involved, and the Rebbe is emphasizing that. This is not like as we as Jews shouldn't be marrying Gentiles. Gentiles shouldn't be marrying a Jew either. It's not fair to them. It's wrong. It's wrong for them. So as to how to go about it and what to do to prevent this, it depends on the individual, his character, and various other factors, in light of which one must try and find the most effective way. And that's the key. Is there a question here?
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
When do you say if God's will is not being done, if you figure that he's in charge of everything?
Are you asking how could an intermarriage take place if God doesn't want it to?
I guess.
That's free choice, because
When does his will start and ours take over? If we feel that God's in charge of everything.
when you say God is in charge of everything, I'm just not sure what your question is. So in other words, when you say God is in charge, you mean God is in control, or God is in charge as far as what's right and wrong? Am I?
Maybe both.
Okay. So God doesn't control everything. God is in control of everything, but he doesn't control everything. He gives us free will to make choices. So anything that he gives us the free choice within, God gives us control over, to choose. So, for example, who we marry is our choice. So God doesn't control that. However, God does tell us why every human being is here, what every human being's purpose is, and the Jews have a distinct purpose, and Gentiles have a distinct purpose. Where can I say, hey, God, I want to do what I want to do. I don't want to do what you want to do. And maybe, I'm not sure if that was your question. We have the free choice to do that whenever we want. We can do that in marriage too. How does that work out for marriage? Right? It doesn't work out very well in any relationship, right? Because if we don't consider the other person, we start breaking down the relationship. So, so we can do that, and that's what people do, right? But the entire idea of living life properly is to align my will with God's will more and more and more. And really the highest level of living, right, which is going to sound radical, that's what they call us anyway, but it's going to sound radical, and that is really losing my identity in the identity of God. Now, I don't know anyone other than the greatest righteous people, tzaddikim, who have done that, but that is what we aspire to, losing my will in the will of God to the point that I lose my identity. There is no I, which basically is saying that there's no ego. And I want to say, just to support that in a practical way so we can appreciate it, because it may sound very jarring to lose our identity in our I, that is the happiest state that a human being can be in, and that's where people find happiness. In the less ego and the less I and the less what I believe and what I want and what feels good to me I live out of, the happier I am. And the classic scenario I offer for that is that our happiest states are when we lose ourselves in something that's going on outside of us. And that's so. For example, if I'm by my child's wedding, and I'm looking at my child standing under the chuppah, smiling or crying, going through a very deep experience, I am feeling really like I'm feeling so good, and I don't even know I'm feeling good because I'm lost in observing them. That is the deepest level of happiness. The deepest level of happiness is a happiness that is outside, that is where I lose a sense of myself in something else. So that is what we aspire to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I have another question. What
Yeah.
about a disease that you don't control, and you think that God has given it to you for the purpose of appreciating life more, or do you think God is not involved in that?
God is involved in everything.
Right.
Even though I know that creates an emotional challenge for us, especially when we're talking about a disease. Why God gives us a disease is a very good question, which I can't answer. It will be different for every single person. And we won't necessarily know because God doesn't tell us. But there are some generalities that we can apply to many situations. That there are general things we can apply to a person dealing with a major challenge in their life. But the first thing I would say is I would only apply it to my challenges. I would never apply it to someone else's challenges. They would have to apply it themselves. The only thing I would apply to someone else's challenges is compassion. And unless they come and ask me and I feel that they are genuinely able to hear other concepts, would I share it with them? Which most people, when they're suffering, have a very hard time hearing any concepts, including myself. So it's the wrong time to preach. But let's say that in general, so I don't know if it's something practical, and especially if you're speaking about yourself, I would leave it at what I just said. But if you're speaking in generalities, again, as the Rebbe said in the earlier letter, every challenge, it's very valuable when we begin to appreciate that every challenge we have in life is given to us by God for a purpose, and that we should focus on what that purpose is, and we'll always find different things that we get out of this challenge. The example I'm going to use is that, which I'm sure I've shared multiple times here, is that countless individuals who have had life-threatening illnesses and miraculously came out on the other side of it, have said and say, I would not trade that experience for anything, but I would not wish it upon anybody. Meaning, I would never ask for such an experience. But now that I had that experience, that has been the deepest experience I've ever had, and that has changed the way I look at the entire life. I look at completely differently, and you can see that they are changed people. They are completely different people, and they know that they would never have become who they are today without that experience. So we know that any challenge, right, offers, and the bigger the challenge, the more it offers, and we never wish it upon anybody. But hopefully we have developed ourselves as God gives us challenges to be able to have perspective, that type of perspective as we deal with them. We're talking about heavy things. I just want to acknowledge that. Is that okay? We're good?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, so the Rebbe continues. One second. All right, so we're talking about the intermarriage. So a further point to bear in mind is that all members of a Jewish family are considered by our Torah, called Torah Semes, the Torah of truth, because it is the actual truth, as one body. The entire Jewish people are considered to be the Jewish family. I like how the Rebbe says the members of a Jewish family that are considered one. That means all of us are part of one family, which is, by the way, the best way to describe the Jewish people, right? Because we're not a race. Like if you break down all of those different things, and we're not a a nation, meaning that we're not all from Israel, right? And you have, and we're not a color. You have black Jews, you have white Jews, you have right? We have every type of Jew exists in the world. So we don't fit into any category. The only way to really describe the Jewish people is a family, and that is true, actually, because spiritually, we are all a family. And meaning, so that would even include converts, are spiritually part of the Jewish family. And just as in the case of the body, when one part of it is invigorated, the benefit is shared by the other parts of the body. So too is in the spiritual life of a Jewish family. When members of the family, especially the parents, strengthen their own adherence to the Jewish way of life in the daily life, in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, this is bound to have a good influence on all the children and strengthen their adherence to the Jewish way of life. The analogy goes even deeper. For the drug or medicine which is administered to the body has to be in a sufficient dose so that enough of it should reach the affected area. Similarly, when parents want to influence the children in matters of Yiddishkeit, or, for that matter, any Jew wishing to influence another, must set his own standards much higher than the minimum. So the Rebbe is addressing, don't do how much can I get away with Judaism? Like some people, they look at Judaism as, okay, I got to do the right thing, but how much is acceptable? Right? So they're looking for the bare minimum. So everybody's saying that's not the approach we should be taking. But because if we want to influence not only ourselves, but our children and the entire Jewish people who we are all one family with, then we have to, the higher a standard we take, the more of an influence we're bringing on everyone. Similarly, when parents want to influence the children in matters of Yiddishkeit, or for that matter, any Jew wishing to influence another, must set his own standards much higher than the minimum, in as much as only some of it, and not all of it, is absorbed by the other. There is surely no need to elaborate to you further on all the above. May God grant that you should have good news to report. I heard Rabbi Kotlarski, if you know who he is, once say that, a story that my grandfather used to say, my grandfather used to refer to Shabbos or Saturday as Shabbos Kodesh, which means the Holy Shabbos. My father used to say, I gitten Shabbos, which is in Yiddish a good Shabbos. I say a good Shabbos, and my child it says have a nice weekend. In other words, it slowly becomes less and less and less. So we have to understand that the lower we go, the lower we set the bar, the lower it's going to be in the next generation. Not that it's absolutely that way, because I have to say, thank God, that sometimes we see our children actually outdo us, which is the greatest source of blessing. But we have to assume that for the sake of the level we're setting for ourselves.